So, what is a class? What I've done is I have made a test file to demonstrate how classes work. So, first off, I'm going to put in the usual stuff like so. So, this is how you make a class. You start with class, and then the name of the class, call it test class, and then pair of braces, and then a semicolon. So, one thing that classes do is that they control access to the code which is contained within it. There are 3 access levels, and they are private, protected, and public. Things which are marked public can be accessed outside of the class. Here's what I mean by that. So I'm going to make a string variable and then include string. Then I'm going to make the value of it. This is a public variable. Now what I'm going to do is make an instance of the class. So I'm just going to make a variable. The type of this variable will be the name of the class. And I'm just going to call this variable class instance 1. And I'm just going to leave the value blank. This is how you create a basic class. Next, I'll save this to a variable and then print it out to the terminal. So, here's how I do it. I'm going to make another string, call it test string, and then the value will be this here. Dot public item 1, and yep, here we are. And now I'm going to print out this string which I've just created to the terminal. So I'm going to run this now. And I see this is a public variable, so the value was retrieved from the class. So that's how you access things which are marked as public. The name of the class instance dot the name of the thing which is marked as public. So now, what is private? First, I'm going to make a variable marked as private, and then make the value. This is a private variable. So, things which are marked private cannot be accessed outside of the class. For example, so this right here is where I am accessing this, which is public. Instead, I'm going to access the private variable which I've just created. And right away, there's an error. This is not going to run, but I'm going to run it anyways. And look, there's an error. So that's the difference between public and private. Things marked as public can be accessed outside of the class. Things marked as private cannot. So then you may be wondering, why would you ever use private? I'll talk about this later on. So the last one is protected. What is protected? Well, basically things that are marked as protected are basically private, but they can be accessed by classes that are linked to a class, which I'll explain later on. So, what's the point of a class and why would you ever use one? Let's say that what I wanted to do was add 2 numbers, but do it a bunch of times. I could do int number 1 equals, 2, int number 2 equals 3, and then stdcout number 1 plus number 2, and the line. And if I wanted to do this a second time, I would have to do this over again. Rename this 2, 3, and 4. And if I wanted to do this a third time, I would have to do this again. And rename it 5 and 6. And change this to 3 and 4. And change this to 5 and 6. So, what I'm doing here is I'm basically saving one number and then a second number and then adding those two numbers together. Then I'm doing it 2 more times. So each time I am saving the same information, which is one number, a second number, then I am doing the same operation each time, which is adding those two numbers. Classes are useful when you have to save the same information multiple times, and also do the same operations on that information multiple times. In this particular case, I am saving two numbers, this, and then adding them together. So how do I make a class which will make this task easier for me, the programmer? Well, here's how I do it. First off, I'm going to make a private variable for the numbers that are being stored. So let's call it number 1, and let's give it a default of 0, and then int number 2, and give it a default of 0 as well. And I'm just going to comment all of this out because I really don't need it, but yep. Okay. Now, before I had said that you can't access private variables outside of the class. So then how am I going to assign values to the private variables that I have just created? One way is to use a function which is marked as public. So this is how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to make a function as normal. So, int, why not? And I'm going to call it set numbers, and I'm just going to put as the parameters int value 1 and int value 2, and then what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to make number 1 equal to value 1. Whoops. Here we are. And I'm going to make number 2 equal to value 2. Like so. Now, the reason that this works is because the function is public, meaning that you can access it outside of the class. At the same time, the function is also part of the class, meaning that the function can access private variables within the class. That means that the function can access these two private variables. Now that I have a function which sets the two numbers that are to be added, I am going to make a second function to add them up. This does not have to return anything, so I'm going to call it void. Oops, I forgot return 0. So I'm going to call it add numbers. And then cout number 1 plus number 2. and end the line. And so let's use it. So first I have to make an instance of the class. So it's still test class. And then I'm going to call it class instance 1 and leave it blank. Now, next I have to run this function here to set the values. So class instance 1 dot, because that's how you access things that are marked public. Add numbers. Set numbers. And I can see from the hint here that I have to put in 2 ints as parameters. So we'll call it 10 and 7. Great. And then I'm going to add them up. So add numbers, which does not take any parameters. And if I run it now, I should see the number 17 in the terminal. And I see 17 in the terminal. Now, if I wanted to do this, say, 2 more times, I could just copy this twice, fix the indenting. Let's say I change this to 11 and this to 12. And here we are. It runs just fine. So now, what is the difference between this and this? Well, for one thing, less work is required. Rather than having to create 2 variables and a print statement every time, all you have to do is run 2 functions, which is a bit less work. Now, this is not the only way of setting the value of private variables. One other way is this, which is constructors. And to do that, just look it up and then find a source like this. And then let's see if I can find an example here. If I were to read this whole thing, here we are, and a constructor looks a bit like this. Now, it is also possible to link one class to another. So far you've seen private as well as public. Protected comes into play when you link classes. So, first I'm going to make another class. Test class 1. And what I want to do here is link this class, link this class to this class. So for now, I'm just going to leave this one blank. And yeah, so now let's say that within this class here, I have a variable that I want to make available to this class when I link it. So I'm going to make it an int, call it linked variable, and I'm going to just give it a value of 8. Okay, now I am going to link test class with test class 1, like so. And within test class 1, here, I'm going to make a public function that takes this value here and multiplies it by 2. So, void, and then call it multiply fixed value. And then, quite simply, I'm just going to take linked variable and multiply it by 2 and end the line. So protected is basically private, except it can also be accessed through linked classes, like what I did here. So I'm going to make an instance of test class 1. Like so. And fix the indenting a bit, that's better. Call it class instance 2. And then I'm going to, I'm just going to call the multiply fixed numbers function. And in the and when I run this thing, I should get 16 printed to the terminal, because it's taking this here, which is 8, which is also accessible here, and multiplying it by 2. Before I run this, I forgot a semicolon somewhere, so I'm going to fix that real quick. And now I'm going to run it, and I see 16. Now let's say I wanted to change the protected variable to 15 instead. I would expect to see 30. And here we are. Now what I can also do is change the value of this from test class 1. And to do that, I can use a function. So I'm going to make a function, call it the set linked variable, and I will assign the protected variable of this one here to one single parameter. Let's make it value. So now, let's say that I want to make the value of this one here 25, and I want to use a function so that I don't have to change the class every time. So I could just call the function, which was set linked variable, and 25 as the parameter, and I should get 50 in the terminal, and 50. So that's a quick demo on how to use protected and how to link classes. So why would you want to link classes then? Well, when you have something which is in another class that you want to use, this can be useful. Rather than recreating that thing that you want to use, linking classes can be easier. Now, what you can also do is have a class which is in a separate file. Then you can include that separate file as if it was a library. That, in turn, can allow you to use the class which you have just linked from an external file. Here's the basics on how to do just that. So first, I'm going to make a file to hold this class. Call it external class.h. And notice how the extension of this external class is .h. And then I put in this at the top and this at the bottom. And I change this part to something unique. External class and I'm just gonna copy this over. Now what I just did there was straight up copied and pasted something with zero explanation. Well, you see, I had done this before, so I saved a copy of an example so I could look it up later on. Do I understand fully how this works? Not exactly, but I know enough that I know how to use it. And that's really what matters. So, let's say that I knew about this concept, but I didn't know how to implement it in C++. This is what I would search. C++, then class in external file, or something along those lines. Then I find a source like this. Then read through to understand it, and then find an example like this. So yeah, that's how I knew how to do it. So, now we can make our class. Since the purpose of this is just to show how to link in external class, what I'll do is make this one really simple. So, I'm going to call it external class, and then forgot that, and I'm going to include IOStream because you have to include all libraries that you're taking stuff from. So IOStream, and to keep things simple, this class will contain exactly one function, which is going to do this. It will print to the terminal a message. And that message is, this function is in an external class. And end the line. So, now we have our class, which is in an external file. So, how do I use this file in this program? You use an include statement. So, I'm going to use an include statement. The difference here is that rather than putting the name of the file in a pair of arrow symbols, you use a pair of quotes. Like so. And the name of the file is external class.h. Note also that this file is in the same folder as this file. So, now that I have linked the file, I'm going to make an instance of the external class. So, I'm going to use this as the type, which is the name of the class, and then fix the indenting, then call it class instance 3, and then I'm simply going to do this. I'm going to call the external function, and if I run this, I should be getting this message in the terminal. This function is an external class. And in the terminal I see this function is in an external class. So yeah, that's the basics of how you link a class which is in an external file. Now what I've just shown you about classes is really just the basics of how to create them and how to use them. There's a lot more that you can do with classes should you want to look into it. Now, let's get back to the password generator program. This program is too simple to actually require classes, but I'm going to put one in anyways. So, what I'm going to do is make a copy of this file. And I'm going to call it test demo with class. So, what can I make into a class? One obvious thing might be this here part where I generate a random character. So I'm going to make that into a class. Now, I already have the function here. So, first off, I'm going to make a class, call it random char class, and alright. When generating the random character, I don't need any inputs, so I don't have to have any private variables for this particular case. Even though I don't have any private variables, I will still put down the labels for private and protected. Then I'm going to put in public because I need this here function to be accessible. So, this function already exists, so I'm just going to cut that and then put it right under public, and then fix the indenting. Good enough. Okay. Now, to actually call this function, I have to create an instance of the class, call it random generator, and then to call the function, I do that here, which is where I want to return a random character. And if I run this now, nothing should change. The program should work exactly as it did before. So, yes I do, password length 30, why not? And I'm going to enter no, and it closes. So yeah, nothing changed. The only difference is that the function which generated the random character is now in a class. Now, one other thing that you might encounter is called multithreading. So, what is multithreading?